We now look at Leibniz's metaphysics, specifically his metaphysical points. So Leibniz set out to develop a metaphysics that would reconcile science and theology, something that other philosophers such as our good dead friend Descartes had also attempted. Now, going back to our Descartes section, at least with in terms of his view of substances, Descartes famously claimed that there are two types of substances, specifically the incorporeal mind and the corporeal extended matter, mind and body. This makes Descartes a substance dualist, in the sense that he has two types of metaphysical stuff. Now, Leibniz saw the notion that the substance that physics studied, namely extended pieces of matter, was problematic. So what were the problems that he saw with this Cartesian matter? Well, for Leibniz, it had the following problems. First, the dynamic nature of matter indicates that such substances cannot be inert pieces of matter. They must be internally active centers of force. Secondly, he takes the view that matter cannot be a fundamental substance. Why? Well, looking back at the past and the course, if you have matter that has extension, it is seemingly infinitely divisible. If it is any length, that could be halved, that could be halved, that could be halved. And this probably brings to mind some of the Zeno's paradoxes we looked at way back in the beginning. And so his assumption is whatever is a fundamental entity must by definition be indivisible. Because if it could be split more, the reasoning is presumably it would not be fundamental. And I often use the metaphor of like a magic sword that could somehow cut anything. And if the idea would be is the fundamental entity would be something that you could not split anymore. It would be the most basic. Now, of course, there are ways around this. You could argue that even though you can split matter forever, no matter how much you slice it, it's matter all the way down. So you're not splitting matter into other types of, stuff like matter and natter and quatter and just making up stuff here. That is, it's matter all the way down on that side. So that'd be a way around it. But for Leibniz, again, the two problems are that matter on the Cartesian account is inert, and it needs, a locus of force, so to speak, and that it needs something that's indivisible. And matter, by definition, being extended, is divisible. And the third problem is our old problem, the mind-body problem. How does the physical body get controlled and interact with the ghosty mind? How does the ghost drive around the machine? And so those are the three main problems that Leibniz saw with Cartesian matter. So for Leibniz, Descartes' account, mistaken. Now he also had a nemesis in Spinoza, our good dead friend Benedict Spinoza. Now Spinoza, as we saw, ends up in really extreme monism. There's one type of thing and there's one entity. It's all, God is, one. He is the only thing and everything. So Leibniz rejects Spinoza's monism on the grounds of essentially an appeal to intuition, or an appeal to what is evident, that the world having a plurality, not being but one thing, seems just evident. Now, we also looked at Spinoza, his view that you have, looking at God, you have the attribute of thought and the attribute of extension. And Spinoza had this view that they're not the same, but they're just God who can be looked at, as, in terms of thought, but could also be looked at in terms of extension. They're not reducible to each other, but there's but one thing. And Leibniz saw this as at least as bad as Cartesian dualism. So the Cartesian account of matter he rejects, and Spinoza's, monotheistic, literally monotheistic, there is but one God and it's just one thing, saw that as problematic as well. Now, he also ends up rejecting materialism. So, why? Well, his main argument against materialism, the idea that all there is matter, is he sees it to be impossible to give a materialistic account of consciousness, to explain it in purely physical terms. And as you might suspect, the debate over, the possibility of having thinking matter is a core debate in metaphysics. Can you have something that is material think? Our good dead friend David Hume said, he sees no contradiction in something being, say, square and blue and thinking. Not his exact words, but, matter. No reason to think there's a contradiction in matter thinking. Descartes, of course, believed that matter couldn't think, but Leibniz rejects Cartesian dualism. So why does he think that consciousness is not, possible in matter? Well, he gives kind of interesting sci-fi argument that if you were shrunk down, super small, and got into the machinery of a person's brain, Leibniz says you'd never encounter that person's thoughts, feelings, or sensations, even though you could see all the matter in there. So from this, he concludes that consciousness is distinct from matter. An interesting argument. And you might perhaps be wondering about the Fantastic Voyage thing in the background. Well, there was a book called Fantastic Voyage, and the idea is that there's this person who's important for world peace, and they've got a medical condition, and it's impossible to operate on them, except they have to shrink down a surgical team to microscopic size, along with their super high-tech submarine, and inject them into the body of the patient, and they go to conduct the surgery. And of course, there's treachery and betrayal and violence and so forth. And if you've seen, it's a popular thing in science fiction, especially ones that involve kind of like making fun of, past, and also kind of an homage to past great works. And so you'll see in various works kind of a Fantastic Voyage kind of scenario, because the writer is either familiar with it or maybe just looked it up on the Wikipedia. So what does he end up embracing? Well, Cartesian dualism is out, Spinoza's pantheism is out, materialism is out, and what it ends up embracing is phenomenology. And if you look back to our good dead friend George Berkeley was also a phenomenologist. However, Leibniz differs from him in many important ways. So in terms of his classification, Leibniz ends up being a monist. There's just one type of stuff, mental stuff. And he has to give an account of what matter, since there seems to be like matter stuff, so what is it? Well, for him, it's a phenomena, like a rainbow. We'll see more of this later. So matter for him is not a fundamental substance. It's not an ontological kind, but it's the result of something more fundamental. So he's not, in a way, saying there's no matter. He's just saying that there's no fundamental ontological category of matter. And it maybe seem like a distinction that is kind of a needless distinction, but it's an important distinction. Namely, that there is body, but not in the metaphysical sense of a separate substance. So what is the thing that is? Well, again, for Leibniz, it's these metaphysical points, which he calls monads. So they're centers of force. They're not particles of moving matter, and for Leibniz, they would be the basic element of science. And they're real, they're what's real, and they're indivisible. They can't be split. So they're not extended like physical points, and they can't be divided, so they meet his fundamental unsplittable requirement. They're also not like mathematical points, because for Leibniz, mathematical points would be theoretical abstractions. So they're indivisible, metaphysical, non-physical, non-mathematical. They do connect to his infinitesimal calculus. How so? Well, The infinitesimal calculus was created by him to deal with motion, and motion explained in terms of being a continuum with an infinite number of infinitesimal points. And I'm not going to attempt to explain it anymore because math is hard, not my thing. I mean, I do basic math, but I'll leave the math to the mathematicians. The distinction, of course, is if you look at motion as a continuum made up of an infinite number of infinitesimal points, kind of the main opposing viewpoint is motion as a series of discrete leaps. And so what the model ends up becoming is this. For him, reality would be a continuum of forces, mathematically ordered. That's his view. Now, put in, can't really say simple terms because it's still pretty complicated, but his view is essentially is this. What is reality made up of? His answer would be, again, these centers of force, metaphysical points that are non-extended, non-divisible, non-mathematical. And it's an entire continuum. More on that later. Now, he calls these things monads. So, what are the monads? Well, for him, they are these metaphysical points. They're called monads. And they are the basic element of reality. Everything that is a monad. I'm a monad, you're a monad, wouldn't you want to be a monad too? We don't actually have a choice because by his view we're all monads. So why is it called this? Well, the Greek word monos means unity or that which is one. We get our expressions, you might have heard of like, mononucleolus, the illness, or like monoplane or monorail, and that means, one. So these monads are immaterial, and they're substances. And how many of them are there? Infinite number, according to Leibniz. Now things will start getting even weirder, which you may not think possible, but is always possible in philosophy. So minds are monads, and monads are minds. So he takes this as showing why there's not matter. Why? Well, he thinks that minds cannot be extended. It makes no sense to claim that the mind is round or blue or 6 feet wide or 6'2" and blue, he claims. Now again, there are other philosophers who disagree with that, as you might expect. Now, one thing we know about minds, whatever they are, is they seem to contain thoughts, feelings, and desires. But for him, these don't exist on their own as distinct beings. They're part of the mental experience. Now again, this is similar to the view we've seen throughout the course of the course when people talk about substances and properties. So, entities have these qualities, but we don't think that like red can exist by itself. We think there can be red things, but they couldn't just be like a bucket of red. They could be a bucket of red paint, but not a bucket of red. And similarly, things can have mass and volume, but we wouldn't expect to find like a cup of mass or a cup of volume. So these monads do have qualities, but they're metaphysically simple. They don't have parts. So your thoughts, feelings, desires, etc. wouldn't be parts of your mind. You would just be the monad, and these things would be kind of like modes of it. And so in some ways, looking back at our good dead friend Spinoza, each of us would be like how God is in Spinoza's view, namely that it's a single entity, containing stuff, but they're not separate entities. So all these minds are monads, all the monads are minds. And what this entails is, for Leibniz, is that all monads perceive. So perception occurs at all levels of reality. So this would mean that, like, if you're looking at your phone is perceiving you as well. I don't mean like someone watching you through the camera, like the government or the Russians or somebody, but the phone itself, from Leibniz's view, would be perceiving you. And anything else, like your clothes are perceiving you, etc., which can be kind of awkward, I would suppose. Now, some of the monads are higher minds, like you and me and other people, etc. And we can engage in what's called a perception. basically perception with an app in front of it, like apperception. And this is just a fancy term for conscious perception. So going back to our phone example, your phone is perceiving you. And again, I don't mean like the Russians or somebody watching you through it. It's that somehow the monads making it up are perceiving you. Similar like for your sock. We'll use the example of your sock because the phone, I guess, makes it kind of complicated. So your sock, if you're wearing one right now, is perceiving you. But you have a perception. So you are consciously perceiving the sock, but the sock is not consciously aware of you. So if you're worried, my God, when I put on a sock, am I wearing a person? And the answer for Leibniz would be, no. That socks and stuff would not be people. They would not be, have this higher perception. And it goes all the way down to the lowest level. So for him, nature is this continuum. There would be the least of monads that perceive the least, and then the highest level, of course, it's going to be God, because Leibniz believed in God. So what about this lifeless matter that scientists talk about? Well, for Leibniz, there's none of that stuff. Everything is minds all the way down. So this means he's a monist idealist. The basic element of reality is mental in nature. So in terms of categorizing him, he's a rationalist. Didn't go into that because we're not looking so much as epistemology, but he's one of those as well. And he embraces idealism or phenomenology, that everything is mental. And interestingly, he also accepts a view called panpsychism, not to be confused with pantheism or panpipes or panpizza. It's the view that reality is composed of minds all the way down. Everything has minds. And again, it's not that like your sock is intelligent, like in a cartoon. It can think and talk to you sometimes. The view is that the minds of objects perceive but have no consciousness. But it's minds all the way down. Everything is mental. And that's panpsychism. So this continuity, how does this work and fit in? Well, the idea is this. It's based in his view of math, the notion of a continuum. So, based on his math stuff, he claims the world follows the law of continuity. That nature doesn't make leaps, nature doesn't have gaps. So, what this means is, nature is monads at every level, from, God at the top, the greatest of monads, down to the absolute minimal level. Whatever it is that's a minimal above zero. I don't know what that number would be, but it would be the smallest possible perception that anything less would be zero. Now, Leibniz also advanced, to do a little bit of logic, he put forth famously the identity of indiscernibles, sometimes known as Leibniz's law. So he contends that if you had two identical monads that could not be distinguished, they would actually be one thing. They can't be two. So two identical things can't be two, they must be one. So every monad in the universe for him is unique, because otherwise, if they could be identical, there would be, if it was possible for there to be multiple identical things, there could be non-unique monads. He says that's impossible, so everything is unique. So I'm unique, you're unique, but in a way it's nothing special because, interestingly, everything is unique. Now in logic, this is kind of the standard way it's presented, put logically. Here's the identity of indiscernibles. If, for every property F, object X has F, if and only if object Y is F, then X is identical to Y. Or, in symbolic logic, because everyone loves symbolic logic, we've got this presentation which says that in symbolic logic. Essentially, again, for every property F, for all F, object X has property F, that's the Fx part. If and only if is that double arrow thing, the material biconditional. Object Y is F, that's the F with the Y thing there. Then you have the conditional arrow, then X is equal to Y. So a little bit of symbolic logic there. So that is Leibniz's famous law, one of the things he's known for. Now we'll talk more about the monads in the future, seeing how they are windowless. So as always, stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.